When two young women, Colleen Reed and Melissa Northrup, go missing in eerily odd, similar circumstances, all signs point to a death row inmate who's on parole and on the run. Nobody can find that convicted killer, and a massive manhunt ensues. The way he killed people, the way he tortured them, the pleasure he took in it is on a whole different level.
Are you Melissa's killer?
No.
And in the aftermath of his trial, the corruption involved with the parole system is exposed for all the world to see. I've prosecuted a lot of really horrible people, but Kenneth McDuff is in a world of his own.
The evidence shows that this defendant is every person's nightmare.
No comment.
Melissa Northrup is a petite mother of two children and pregnant. But she's working these pre-dawn hours at a convenience store to make ends meet. Melissa Northrup's husband phones his wife just to check up on her. Becomes alarmed that she's not answering her phone. So he drives down there and goes in. There's no sign of his wife.
Melissa's husband, Aaron Northrup, when he found out that she was missing, immediately called the Waco Police Department.
911.
Yeah, this is Aaron Northrup at the Quick Pack at 4200 LaSalle. I need a sheriff's DPS officer over here immediately.
What's wrong?
My wife is missing. She's not nowhere to be found around her store. This place is totally vacant. Customers were watching the store.
What is her name?
Melissa Ann Northrup.
We have a missing attendant at the Quick Pack. Her name is Melissa Ann Northrup, white female, 22 years of age. Her vehicle is also missing. There was some money missing from the store, and right now we're treating this as a robbery kidnapping. We have no suspects at this time. Our husband, he has no idea where she's at neither. Of course, he's worried. Our whole family is worried. We just want to locate this young lady.
I talked to my wife 5 minutes before this happens. All of a sudden, she's just gone. And I don't know if you can imagine how that feels.
Investigators found a tan two-door Thunderbird abandoned on the parking lot of a motel located just a few hundred feet from the convenience store where Melissa Northrup has disappeared. The police runs the registration and finds that it's registered to Kenneth Allen McDuff.
Kenneth McDuff is a death row inmate in Texas who was surprisingly paroled out off of a life sentence 2.5 years before Melissa Northrup went missing. He was convicted of a triple homicide of some teenagers back in 1966.
In 1966, Kenneth McDuff and his accomplice, Troy Dell Green, set out on a mission. They went cruising for women. And they found 3 vulnerable teenagers, Edna Sullivan, Robert Brand, and his cousin, Mark Dunham, parked at a local high school on the baseball field, playing music, and they're just laughing and having fun. Little do they know, McDuff and Roy Dell Green are crawling toward the car. Roy Dell Green has a broken handle of a broomstick with him. And McDuff's got a revolver. He jumps up to the car window with his gun drawn, and then the nightmare starts. McDuff forced the 2 boys into the trunk of his car. He then took Edna Sullivan in Robert Brand's car and drove it down these country roads with Troy Dell Green following in McDuff's car. Finally, they came to a desolate place. He opens the trunk, and there's Robert Brand and his cousin, and he tells his accomplice, Roy Dell Green, they've seen us. I gotta kill him. And he shoots them. Then drags Edna Sullivan to the back of the car and assaults her with the broken handle of a broomstick. He straddled Edna Sullivan and placed the broomstick across her throat. And he crushed her larynx.
MacDuff and Roydale Green drove back to the Rosebud area where they lived. And then several days later, Roydale Green felt terribly guilty about what happened and spoke to the sheriff there and confessed what they had done. It was an absolutely terrible crime, absolutely brutal in every way. And so the sheriff and other deputies began looking for MacDuff. They were able to find him. He tried to get away. There was some shooting, and then he was captured. The trial drew a lot of publicity.
The first time I heard the name Kenneth MacDuff was in 1966. My father was U.S. Marshal at the time. He was talking to the sheriff of Falls County, and he was a tough guy, but he was visibly shaken up, and he was telling my dad about MacDuff, and it made me sick. He was known as the broomstick killer because that's what he used to kill Edna Sullivan with after he tortured her with it.
Roydale Green pleaded guilty to one of the murders and some of the circumstances, so he got a 5-year sentence and a 25-year sentence. And he turned state's evidence to testify against Kenneth MacDuff.
The jury found Kenneth MacDuff guilty, and he was assessed the death penalty.
Six years after Kenneth MacDuff had killed the 3 high school teenagers, Furman v. Georgia came down from the United States Supreme Court. In that landmark case, the Supreme Court said that the death penalty was unconstitutional because it was applied arbitrarily all across the country. That meant that every death row inmate in the country, including Kenneth MacDuff, had their death sentence commuted to life.
Texas prisons had become very crowded. So, although he had originally gotten a death penalty, Kenneth MacDuff was released from prison on parole.
When Kenneth MacDuff had his sentence commuted to life, you want to believe, okay, we're still safe, because he would never be released to free society again, but he was. Everybody in the criminal justice system was wondering, how can this happen?
The Waco area, Central Texas area, certainly had its share of crime, but abductions, missing persons, that would have been pretty unusual. And then the circumstances of it were odd. So you suspect the worst.
The investigators didn't have a lot to go on. And when they came up with this license plate that came back to MacDuff, that was something to work on, but that wasn't enough to find and to arrest Kenneth MacDuff. You still have to have evidence, and you still have to investigate the case.
We knew we had to do something to try to find Melissa. If she was kidnapped by MacDuff, the urgency was paramount.
All of a sudden, we learn about a case that sounds a whole lot like Melissa's.
Then police told me we believe she's been abducted. Yeah, this is a nightmare.
We felt like MacDuff probably got her.
And by the way, he's a killer.
I think that everyone wanted to believe that Melissa Northrup was out there still alive. Everybody was focused on trying to find her and track down her kidnapper.
Melissa's car was discovered by a fisherman near the gravel pit outside of Dallas. He contacted the local authorities. No fingerprints were found in Melissa's car, but the seat was pushed all the way back. Melissa was like 4'10", 4'11", Kenneth McDuff. He was a big guy. He was 6'3", 6'4", weighed probably 270 pounds or so. It indicated that a very large person, someone of McDuff's size, had been driving that car. An extensive search was conducted in that area, but she was not found.
One day after the car had been located, I received a missing persons report for Kenneth Allen McDuff, and this was reported by his mother, Addie McDuff. She said she'd not heard from him in days. She was concerned about him. Kenneth McDuff had a parole violation warrant at that time.
This is the oldest scam going. When a parolee has jumped parole and taken off, often a family member will say they're missing, just as a cover story.
With McDuff missing about the same time that Melissa Northrop was missing, and with McDuff's car within 100 feet or so of the convenience store, we thought that ought to give rise to some pretty quick action by the state to try to at least find the guy. Unfortunately, the DA says there's no probable cause. We're not getting a warrant to get McDuff, even though the woman's missing. Circumstantially, he's connected to it, and by the way, he's a killer.
This is just the way you follow the law, and that's what they were doing here. And they didn't have enough evidence to connect anybody to the disappearance of Melissa Northrop. So at that point, Bill Johnston came up with a novel approach to try and figure out where Kenneth McDuff was and get him in custody.
One of the deputies said, "We have a bail bond clerk whose boyfriend might have run around with McDuff." And I talked to the boyfriend and I asked him, "What did you do with him?" And he said, "Well, he bought 2 tabs of LSD and gave me one." That's federal drug distribution. I called the U.S. magistrate judge and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to send over a complaint and warrant alleging a violation of 21 United States Code Section 841A1, distribution of a controlled substance, namely LSD." The judge signed the warrant, and so a nationwide manhunt for Kenneth McDuff took place on the distribution of a single tab of LSD. It went through a huge effort by many agencies and many people.
The Central Texas Task Force, as we called it at the time, was the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, Waco Police, of course, U.S. Marshals. We had officers from ATF. It was an unbelievable effort on everybody's part to catch this guy as quickly as we could.
They did a search warrant at McDuff's parents' house, and during which the mother declared, "Don't frame little Junior." The father, he was in the garage of their house during the search, and I heard him say, "Oh, that boy's cost me a lot of money. You can kill him when you find him if you want to." I mean, it's a real loving family.
While the task force is looking for Melissa Northrop and Kenneth McDuff, they hear of the disappearance of someone from Austin, Texas that happened just a few months before. It sounds eerily similar to what happened to Melissa Northrop.
Colleen Reed and I were seriously dating. The 29th of December, 1991, she had errands to run, and she mentioned she had to go wash her car. And then probably about 9:30, I got the first call from the police department asking to speak to Colleen. And I said, "Well, she's not here. What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we found her car abandoned at the car wash, and we believe she's been abducted." I was surprised and obviously worried. Colleen was a gift from God. She was a blessing to me. She was 28 at the time, and we talked about getting married and, having children and having a life together. She was very beautiful inside and out. She was just always looking to help people, and she cared about her community. She just volunteered for everything, and I think that was her passion, to do right things. We loved each other, no doubt about it.
The Colleen Reed case. Witnesses observed 2 males forcing a female into a Thunderbird.
We knew McDuff drove a tan Thunderbird. It's possible that it could have been the same car. So now we felt like McDuff was the one that probably got her. And so we were trying so hard to find out if she was still alive and maybe rescue her, along with Melissa Northrop.
Back then, there wasn't quite the technology today we might have gained from surveillance cameras. And so the approach that we took was, let's find everybody that knows McDuff and talk to them.
I was brought in as the liaison investigator since McDuff had spent so much time on death row. My job was interviewing ex-cons and guys out on parole that he knew from the penitentiary. He wasn't a very popular guy in the penitentiary.
He was running with really bad outlaws, scumbags of all kinds.
Finally, we developed an acquaintance named Hank Worley.
Worley was a paroled ex-con.
It was told to us he was an associate of McDuff's and he drove around with McDuff.
I started doing research on Worley, and I determined that he had a civil hearing. I walked over to the courthouse on the day of the hearing, and I caught Worley as he was walking out. I asked him if I could talk to him. Worley said he would. Took him to the Bell County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigation Division. I started questioning Worley about the Reed and Northrop disappearance. Worley was extremely nervous, trying not to make eye contact. I wasn't sure what he knew, but I didn't want to put a whole lot of pressure on him, and I didn't want to lose him. So I told him I'll be back in touch. Hank Worley was living at Bloom Motel with his daughter. It's a rundown, low-rent hotel. I went to visit Hank several times. One evening, about 6 o'clock, I received a phone call from Hank Worley. He said, "I need to talk to you now." So I drive over, and he was waiting outside for me. He walks over to the passenger side door, and he says, "I was with McDuff when he took that girl in Austin." He said, "I got to ask you a favor. Can I go talk to my daughter one last time because I'm probably not coming back?" I said, "Yes." He said goodbye to his daughter. He came back, got in the car, and we went to the sheriff's office.
Tim Steglich got Worley to tell what was probably 90% of the truth. And it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. And it remains the worst thing I'd ever heard.
When the investigators interview Hank Worley, not only does he talk about his own involvement, he gives them even more details about exactly what Kenneth McDuff did to Colleen Reed.
Worley started by saying he and McDuff went to Austin to get bent, which is to get high. And while they were driving on 5th Street, they see a female at a car wash. And McDuff made some statement that, "We're going to take that girl."
He tells us that Colleen Reed is washing her sports car at this car wash, and then McDuff pulls into the bay next to her, gets out, grabs her by the throat, brings her to the car, throws her in the back seat. McDuff gets in the back seat with her. Worley drives off, and then the torture begins.
Colleen Reed's hands were bound with shoelaces while they were in transit. They drove around Austin and then drove north on Interstate 35.
Worley told us McDuff is in the back seat torturing Colleen Reed with a cigarette over and over.
Worley drove a vehicle for 2 hours with a woman screaming.
He's visibly shaken up when he is remembering how loud her screams are. And he told us, he said, loud that hurt my ears. He had his head down and he was shaking. And then he went down on his knees. We're just in disbelief. And she begged Worley for help. Worley says, "I was afraid of McDuff myself." There were all kind of ways Worley could have jumped out of the car and waved people down and got them involved, and McDuff would have been caught. But he was a low-life coward.
Colleen was taken to a field about 200 to 300 yards from Kenneth McDuff's parents' residence in Bell County.
McDuff drug her out of the car and reared back and hit her so hard in the face that Worley described it like a tree limb breaking. And so then he drags her over and threw her in the trunk. Afterwards, he took Worley by his house. McDuff let Worley out of the car, and McDuff drives off into the night with Colleen Reed in the trunk.
The level of brutality was shocking. We're speechless.
I was so angry. I can't even tell you what I wanted to do to Worley at the time.
What happened to her was everything we feared, and even worse. It's coming true. It all came to fruition. It's like, yeah, this is a nightmare. Sorry.
Although he didn't have any knowledge of Melissa Northrup's disappearance, the statement from Hank Worley is pretty hard to listen to, and it had to have gotten those investigators super fired up to try and find Kenneth McDuff.
Worley led us to believe that McDuff would have murdered Colleen Reed and buried her somewhere in that area of Bell County. The next day, there was a helicopter with an infrared unit on it. They had the entire Austin Police Cadet Academy come up and walk the fields. An enormous effort was made to try to find a grave, and none was ever found.
With Hank Worley's confession that he and Kenneth McDuff were the ones who abducted Colleen Reed, and Melissa Northrop going missing just 2 months after that in similar circumstances, the investigators knew they were on the right track. Kenneth McDuff was no longer just a person of interest. He is the sole suspect in the disappearance of Melissa Northrop.
What we know about Kenneth Allen McDuff, he's a violent, dangerous human being. And like the captain says, he needs to be off the streets.
Central Texas were on edge. People were scared to death that this creature would catch them or their wives or their daughters.
Almost 2 months after Melissa Northrop goes missing, a resident of South Dallas makes a grisly discovery.
Melissa Northrop's body is found in a deserted gravel pit that's filled with water in Dallas County, about a 100-mile drive from Waco. Her remains are found by a fisherman about a quarter-mile away from where her car was found stuck in the mud.
We do have a positive identification on the body. It is that of Melissa Ann Northrop.
The one clue that this is the work of Kenneth McDuff is that her ankles and hands are bound with shoelaces.
McDuff had certain traits and certain patterns, and one of them was he liked to bind his victims' hands and feet if he could, and he often used their shoestrings. He would literally get their shoes off, pull the string out, and use it.
It was a great sense of relief that we finally found her. We finally knew what happened and gave us more evidence to use against McDuff if and when we could catch him.
At this point, you have the detailed statement of Hank Worley, you have the body of Melissa Northrop, you have her car, and you have Kenneth McDuff's car. And they know that both victims had been tied up with shoelaces, but you're still missing 2 big pieces. You're missing the body of Colleen Reed, and you're missing Kenneth McDuff.
I mean, the truth is we didn't have a clue where he was. And the Marshal Service had a notion to put it on national television.
I contacted America's Most Wanted.
The families of those murder victims pray for the capture of McDuff. Tonight, your call could end the manhunt.
America's Most Wanted aired that Friday. We got a call Monday from Kansas City police that they think McDuff may be in that area.
The Kansas City Police Department had gotten information from a viewer that had watched America's Most Wanted show. Hey, this is the guy that's wanted out of Texas for these killings.
A witness who called, who said he thought he was working with McDuff in Kansas City.
McDuff had gotten arrested up there on a prostitution sting, but they didn't take him into custody. They just wrote him a bench ticket and put his thumbprint on the ticket. I had the prints from the prison, and we compared them, and it was obvious that it was him.
We couldn't believe it after all this manhunt. Finally going to get this low-down scum off the street.
The Kansas City police find out that he was working on a garbage truck. So they set up a sting operation involving a checkpoint and stopped the truck under the pretense that they were doing a safety inspection on the vehicle. And that's when they identified and arrested him.
McDuff denied everything and then finally said, I want to talk to an attorney.
After he was caught, the federal judge ordered him removed to Waco, Texas, and the U.S. Marshals provided their fastest jet. So McDuff was handcuffed and he was placed in the jet opposite from me and a couple seats back. I think about being on the airplane with that guy. God, you know, he probably should have been duct taped to the seat.
We got back to the airport here in Waco, put him in a sheriff's unit, and we bust every red light coming through town. We get to the federal courthouse, and this big crowd of family and loved ones of people that had been his victims.
The word had gotten out. There was a groundswell of outrage.
By this time, everybody in Texas knew what a monster this guy was.
And they're screaming and cursing him. They're good people that have lost loved ones. And here we are having to protect this serial killer.
After finding Melissa Northrup's body and then arresting Kenneth McDuff, he is charged with the capital murder of Colleen Reed and the capital murder of Melissa Northrup. But Colleen Reed's body still has not been found, and Kenneth McDuff is not talking. Prosecuting a murder without a body is difficult because you have to prove that they're dead, and you like to be able to prove the cause of death too, and you can't do that when you don't have a body. For all those reasons, the state decided to move forward with the prosecution of Melissa Northrup's case first.
No comment.
McDuff had escaped the death penalty before because the Supreme Court threw it out. By this time, Texas had reinstated the death penalty. We felt that we needed to get him the death penalty so that he could never commit any more crimes like this. It was going to be difficult. It was not a slam dunk. We didn't have anybody that was an actual eyewitness to the murder of Melissa Northrop.
The prosecution case was the definition of circumstantial. I mean, they had to take a bunch of unrelated facts and put them all together, and there just really wasn't, in our mind, any conclusive evidence that he committed the murder. I think they were relying more on his past and his history than facts. To say it was a high-profile case is probably an understatement.
Say about the charges against you?
There was so much publicity that I don't think you would ever found 12 people who could have impartially judged it.
So the judge decided it would be better to have a change of venue and decided to send the case to Houston.
Is there a place you think you would get a fair trial?
I have to think about that.
Do you think you're a monster?
No.
And Judge Bob Burdett was assigned to oversee the case. And I'm very familiar with how he controls his courtroom. He doesn't put up with any nonsense. You better make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted if you're trying a case in front of him.
When you have a crime and you don't have any witnesses to prove that the person did the crime, the law allows the state to present other very similar offenses, extraneous offenses as they're called.
Typically, you don't try one murder by bringing in another murder, but when you're trying to establish that the same person committed the crime, sometimes it can be allowed in for limited purposes only. There was a hearing in this trial where Judge Bob Burdett had to rule on whether or not he was going to allow into evidence the extraneous other murder of Colleen Reed in the trial of Melissa Northrop.
It's only in pretty limited situations that they're allowed to go into facts of another case, and this was one of them. It was basically 2 murder cases wrapped up into one.
Hank Worley was the key to breaking the case.
Worley's testimony showed how McDuff had accomplished the murder of Colleen Reed and the similarities between her kidnapping and murder and the Northrop kidnapping and murder.
Our cross-examination of Worley was really focused on he was just as potentially liable and as guilty as McDuff and could be facing the same charge and the same punishment. So he had every reason in the world to paint things in a light that got him out of a jam. I didn't think Worley was even close to a credible witness.
I think the testimony was extremely unsettling to the jury.
Kenneth, do you plan on taking the stand?
Yes, I will take the stand.
Are you positive?
It was definitely against our advice to take the stand, but it was something that he wanted to do.
The case they have isn't strong. They fear they get an acquittal verdict on the case as it stands right now. Okay.
Why would Kenneth McDuff take the stand when he hasn't, at that point, talked to law enforcement about anything?
I think that McDuff thought that he could go sell a story to the jury and convince them that he was innocent.
During the trial of Melissa Northrop, Kenneth McDuff says he wants to take the witness stand. His lawyers advise him not to do that, of course, because if he testifies, then he is going to be cross-examined on anything the prosecutors want to ask him about. He does not take the advice of his lawyers, and he takes the witness stand. From the prosecutor's point of view, I'm sure they were very excited that Kenneth McDuff didn't listen to his lawyers.
McDuff testified that he was not in Waco when Melissa Northrop was killed. He said he decided to leave Waco behind, to try to shed his past and get a new life, and gave all these details of his journey. And I'm sure he thought with that long story that he had impressed the jury, but I didn't think he'd accomplish what he intended.
When Kenneth McDuff takes the witness stand, not only can the prosecutors cross-examine him about Melissa Northrop, the victim he's being tried for, they can ask him about Colleen Reed and other crimes that the jury would not have known about when they were just deliberating his guilt.
John Siegler did the cross-examination, and he, of course, questioned McDuff about the murder in 1966. The jury had not heard anything about that murder previously. And also our evidence about the murder of Colleen Reed, that was something that obviously was helpful to us.
The evidence shows that this defendant is every person's nightmare.
The jury was out about 3 hours.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kenneth Allen McDuff, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
Kenneth McDuff is found guilty of murdering Melissa Northrop, and he is sentenced to die by lethal injection.
The whole time the judge was talking, I was crying, and it was just really a load lifted.
Kenneth Allen McDuff is the only person that's been on death row twice in Texas.
Can you tell me how you're feeling?
That's right, I'm guilty.
Any thoughts on what's next?
I guess I'm gonna die, apparently. We all do, you know.
Will today's decision bring your family closure?
There's never be a closure. To me, my daughter's not resting in peace until this man is dead. So I don't want him to be able to do this ever again.
1 year later, and the case against McDuff for the murder of Colleen Reed was tried without a body.
The jury found him guilty and then also assessed a death penalty.
It's a relief, yeah. She died a horrible death, but she lived a good life.
It was like another nail in the coffin. He's not getting out of this one. You're gonna pay now. And there's some pieces of me that I didn't know exist. The hate that I had for that guy and the things that I dreamed that I could do to that guy. It's just like, but God help me.
The last chapter will always be reserved for bringing Colleen home. So, guys.
Kenneth McDuff is finally convicted for the capital murder of Colleen Reed and the capital murder of Melissa Northrup. But people still had a lot of questions. Where's Colleen Reed's body? Has he killed anybody else, anywhere else in the country? And how in the world did he get released from prison in the first place?
After he had been found guilty of capital murder of Melissa Northrup and Colleen Reed, I started investigating the parole board. The state was under pressure for prison crowding by a federal judge. So in 1989, the parole board are told, start releasing 150 inmates a day, 7 days a week. It started off with your hot check rioters and property crimes, but before long, they were at the bottom of the barrel. James Granberry, his parole board chairman, was finding inmates' families who had money.
The investigation revealed that he would actually shake them down. They love their kids. They don't want them in prison, and they'll do anything to get them out.
Kenneth McDuff walked out of a maximum security prison on parole under a cloud of corruption that no one realized at the time.
There was no way to know how many violent criminals got out this way. I was appalled.
Texas is supposed to be this tough place with all these death penalties. Well, heck, they were letting everybody out. It was a travesty, and it was an embarrassment, and it was wrong, and people were dying in the streets because of it.
You sure don't think that a serial killer is going to be one of the ones that slips through the cracks. But that's what happened. And look what happened in the free world, where he got to continue to prey on women, and he killed 2 more people. And that's all the fault of the system.
With McDuff, the justice system did its work. They put him back on death row. But to close those cases for the families, recovering the victims is the priority. So as he was getting close to the execution set date, I started going down to death row. I would spend 4 or 5 hours with him, talking to him. The most chilling thing that he said to me was about Colleen Reed. He said, I took her out of the vehicle and she got away from me and she ran and fell down. He said, if she had just gotten up and ran away, I could have never caught her. But she didn't. She just laid there and cried. I mean, you talk about the hair standing up on the back of your neck.
I needed to know where Colleen Reed was. And I needed him to tell me the truth, but he had no motivation to do so. And we had good information that he was going to be executed in just 2 or 3 weeks. Time was running out.
Seven years after Colleen Reed goes missing, they still can't find her body. Her family is in pain, and Kenneth McDuff is sitting on death row not saying a word. A few weeks before his execution date, a window of opportunity cracks open.
McDuff comes in and he's complaining about a toothache. I say to him, look, you're a man of your word. I'm a man of my word. Here's what's going to happen. The dentist will be here tomorrow. I'll put you first on that list. You'll be going in, getting that tooth fixed. And once you get that tooth fixed, you come in and you sit in that chair and you give us what we need. And that's what he did. He drew out the map for Colleen's location, where he buried her.
This is where McDuff brought Colleen Reed after he tortured her and beat her to death. It brings back so many bad memories and feelings, just knowing what happened to Colleen. Went right out there, about where that third tree is. Had a tractor with a blade, and we had a bulldozer with a blade. Still couldn't find her.
When the blade went by the bulldozer and scraped, I saw something. And I moved away some dirt. And there was Colleen's skull.
We found her. Representatives of the medical examiner's office put her in the back seat of their car and took her back to Austin. They weren't going to put her in a trunk. You know, she was going to ride with them in the car.
We had information that thankfully led us to some remains a while ago. They would be the remains of Colleen. What we heard was done to her was etched in our minds, and I cannot, you just don't understand. We've done this for years. We don't understand how one human being could do that to another human being.
This case, McDuff, coupled with the corruption side of it, changed the way the criminal justice system operated in Texas. It was a huge scandal.
It led to the largest expenditure of taxpayer money for prison construction in history.
There was the first overhaul of the criminal justice code in
over a quarter of a century.
Now we have what's called a series of the McDuff laws. He became the poster boy for change in the criminal justice system.
McDuff was executed tonight by the state of Texas. He was pronounced dead at 6:26.
I know that I never have to walk into another courtroom and look at him again. This part is over.
Colleen's memory has lived on. There are people that still love her and miss her. There's an endowment at LSU, her school, Colleen Reed Opportunity Fund, and so her name will be carried on with that scholarship. So
it's nice for us to say that ultimately they got justice. You know what? If I was Colleen Reed or Melissa Northrup's family, I would tell you I don't want to hear any talk about justice because all I feel is pain. Because a monster like Kenneth McDuff roamed the streets of Texas. And a lot of that roaming happened because the system failed Colleen and Melissa, and it failed all of us. And that is a horrible tragedy that should never have happened.